Recording in progress.
Welcome, everyone, to this regular meeting of the Planning and Transportation Commission for Wednesday, September 11th, 2024. Ms. Dow, could you please call the roll?
Chair Chang,
Present.
Vice Chair Rectal,
Here.
Commissioner Aiken,
Here.
Commissioner Heckman,
Here.
Commissioner Liu,
Here.
Commissioner Suma,
Here.
Commissioner Templeton.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay. Our first order of business is public comment on items that are not on the agenda tonight. Ms. Dow, do we have any speaker cards?
I have none for oral communications
Let me just check. And nothing online?
and not online.
Okay, great. And we have a new staff member here today. Welcome. So are there any agenda changes agenda changes, additions or deletions? I'll let you introduce yourselves.
Yeah, no changes to the agenda, and we'll have Ms. Armour introduce herself under the director's report, perhaps.
Okay.
Your next item, or yes,
Okay.
Next item.
All right, next item then.
Shall we launch into it?
Yes, let's launch into it.
Okay, so then maybe I'll first start by introducing Jennifer Armour. She's our Assistant Director of Planning and has joined the city now. This is day 3, and it's already been a bit of a whirlwind tour, I think, in the first few days here. But we wanted to bring Jennifer here to introduce her to the commission. She will be the Planning and Transportation Commission liaison. I'll continue to support until the appropriate transition, but I'll give Jennifer a moment maybe to just introduce herself.
Good evening. Is that working?
You have to speak really close to these microphones.
I was going to say, we're going to have to adjust the wires on this a little bit. Each time you're in a new room, you got to understand how the microphones work. So my name's Jennifer Armour. I have about approximately 20 years of experience in the planning field. The last 9 years of that have been with the town of Los Gatos, but it actually started 20 years ago as part of an internship with the city of Palo Alto, and was previously for 4 years a planner with Palo Alto as well. So I'm very excited to be back and looking forward to working with you all.
Welcome. We are thrilled to have you. All right. You want to go ahead with the staff report, Director Late?
Yeah, so just a couple of updates then for the commission. You have it here before you on the screen. We have a few items that are scheduled for your meeting on September 25th. We're excited to bring the Housing Incentive Program, a discussion for the commission. This is a result from the housing element and one of our key programs as a means to further produce housing production in the city. And then our transportation office will have a couple of updates related to some items that are on their schedule to present to you. And then in October, we will return with the Stream Corridor Ordinance, and you will have a hearing on, we anticipate that you will have a hearing on the planned home zoning application for 660 University, and an update on the Safe Streets for All Safety Action Plan, also from our Office of Transportation.
Question for you, Director Late, about September 25th. In our packet, it mentioned that there might be potential amendments to regulations for the AHIP, the Affordable Housing Incentive Program. Are we only going to be considering the HIP, or are we also doing the Affordable Housing Incentive?
Yeah, this is abbreviated here on the screen, but yes, we will be taking into consideration the HIP and the AHIP.
Great.
And in the future, something even hipper.
Okay.
Still.
Thank you.
You think I'm joking?
Are there additional questions from the commission? No? All right. I guess you wanted to cover this too. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No worries. Just a couple of other updates. The commission may recall its discussion related to retail and retail-like land uses. That's going to go to the planning or the city council's retail ad hoc committee next week. to consider those recommendations. In fact, I think a report's been published. I will send an email to the commission so that you have that for your records, or just to see what's going on with that. And then again, the Office of Transportation will provide an update to the City Council's Finance Committee on the parking program financial review. And then lastly, a stream corridor ordinance to the council in November, scheduled for November. So that concludes the report.
Okay.
Thank you for your attention.
Now, are there any questions from the commission for Director Late? Okay. Oh, sorry. Commissioner Heckman?
Thank you. Two questions. First, the retail study is going to the council on the 18th, which is next Monday. I'm the council representative or representative to council this month. And so is that something that a PTC representative is anticipated to be at?
So this meeting is actually on Wednesday, I believe.
Yeah.
Yes, it's the City Council's ad hoc, retail ad hoc.
Okay.
And representation is not needed at that meeting.
Okay, got it. And then the other question, do we have a representative of the Transportation Department here tonight?
I believe online is Mr. Ruiz. Okay.
Okay. Oh, he's got his hand up.
Okay, very good. Raphael.
There you go. Maybe he has a report for us too, perhaps.
Sure. Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. Rafael Rios, Senior Engineer. I just have a couple of updates for the Office of Transportation. One, the El Camino Real repaving project is being done by Caltrans has started this week. This week, they're working between the Menlo Park city limits down to Stanford Avenue. It's anticipated to take up to 2 weeks to finish the segment, and then they'll be moving south. My other update is for the next rail committee meeting is next Tuesday, September 17th. That's all I have, but if you have any questions, I can try to answer.
Hang on, we've got a question from Commissioner Liu.
I wanted to confirm the overall timelines for El Camino repaving. I noticed on the Caltrans project website, the updated timeline is fall 2025. So I just want to confirm what's in scope for the near future and what's in scope for 2025.
I don't think I'll be able to answer that in detail tonight. I can try to get more details for you and send it through email. I know they are doing the paving. I think the 2025 date, so that's new to me, but I haven't been keeping too close to tabs on it about the fall. I thought it was supposed to be summer, but I guess it's been updated. I would anticipate like that's probably when the final striping. I believe they're going to try to stripe the travel lanes first, kind of where the bike lanes will fit, but and then the bike lanes to follow, presumably next year.
Mr. Rios, this is in line with what I was asking you at pre-meeting too. It would be really helpful for us to understand exactly what this means. We understand that they are starting at one end of El Camino and then moving forward. But what we don't understand is, are they going to repave everything? And then we're going to get the parking back temporarily before we get bike lanes? Or how does that all work? Because we're getting lots of questions from businesses.
Sure. So my understanding was that the parking was not going to return. So right now the parking is removed north of Stanford Avenue. It's still I believe it's still in place south of Stanford Avenue. For the next 2 weeks, they'll be working on that northern segment. Then 2 weeks from now, or approximately 2 weeks from now, they'll restrict the parking south of Stanford Avenue for, I believe, another mile segment, and then so forth. Last I was updated, there wasn't going to be like temporarily returned. The parking wasn't going to be temporarily returned, but I know that was being discussed, so I'll try to get a more detailed update to you this week.
Thank you. Commissioner Heckman has a question.
Thank you. I wanted to find out, Mr. Rios, if you had been able to start your dialogue with the police department about having fatalities and significant injuries included in our monthly traffic incident reports going forward.
Okay, I did forward that. I mean, I did send your request to our liaison that gets in our Office of Transportation that gathers the data, basically, and the person I receive it from and pass it on to you, to this commission. I'll follow up with them. I personally myself have not had a dialogue with our police department on this, but I'll follow up on that previous request.
Thank you.
You might give Ms. Starlock a heads up that when we get that update on safe, a couple weeks from now, that we'll be asking that same question as well then.
Sure.
All right. Commissioner Templeton has a question.
Yes, I was asking a follow-up question based on, or comment based on the discussion of El Camino. So I'm sorry to go back to it, but just to say that our timeline and milestone estimates are probably subject to weather. So depending on how the winter storms go, they may have to redirect resources unexpectedly in the winter, and that may change whether it's summer or fall or whatever. So we should just keep checking in on it. And I think Mr. Ruiz, it'd be nice, for you to expect that we'll ask for updates on the timeline at the Planning and Transportation Commission meetings. So if you are able to, in your regular check-ins with Caltrans, just check in on the milestone dates, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Definitely. I mean, yeah, would expect this.
Okay, I don't see any other lights, so I think we can move on to our one and only action item tonight. This is a public hearing, quasi-judicial, for 70 Encina Avenue. It's a recommendation to forward a planned home zone application to the ARB to rezone 2 contiguous parcels and to redevelop the site. I guess I should take disclosures first. So if we can start with Commissioner Liu and just move on down the line, that would be helpful.
I visited the site, but I have no other disclosures.
I have no disclosures.
Visited the site, but no other disclosures.
I have no disclosures.
I visited the site, but have no disclosures.
I visited the site and had a video meeting with the applicants on August 27th, during which they showed me the renderings that are in the staff report and helped me understand sort of the proposed layout, and also gave me a little background on their previous application to the city council, which is also part of our staff report. So really no additional information obtained in that meeting that is not presented in the staff report and in the attachments to the report.
No disclosures.
Thank you. So I think we'll start with the staff report then. Ms. Callis?
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Emily Callis. I am the project planner for 70 Encina. This is a planned home zoning project, and this is the first hearing for this project with the Planning Commission. Next slide, please. This slide shows the process for the planned community or planned home zoning process. This started with a pre-screening with the City Council in September 2022. The project that was presented at that time was a 5-story, 20-unit building that received a mix of feedback, and between the feedback received and discussions that the property owners had with the operators of Town and Country, they reformatted the project to the 3-story, 10-unit project that is before us tonight. They submitted that for preliminary architectural review in December of last year. This was followed by the formal application submittal in March of this year. It has since gone through 2 rounds of staff review, 1 round in March, the second in August in preparation for this meeting. And So tonight we are having the initial PTC hearing. As a reminder, the purpose of this meeting is for the PTC to provide preliminary comments and move the project forward to the Architectural Review Board. And then after it goes to the ARB, it returns to the PTC for your recommendation to the City Council, and the City Council will make the final decision on this fully discretionary project. And of course, public comments are accepted at all public hearings and any time throughout this process. Next slide, please. This project is located adjacent to the Town and Country Shopping Center and its parking lot with access off of Encina Avenue. In terms of surrounding neighborhood, it is near a Palo Alto Medical Foundation office and other offices. It is also near the Life Moves Opportunity Center, and it is close to the Palo Alto Caltrain station on University Avenue. This is perhaps the most relevant context because that means this project is subject to State Assembly Bill 2097, which means that no parking can be required for this project. However, as you'll see in the plans, this project does provide some amount of parking. Next slide. This project includes 10 condominium units, each with a garage. Some are 1 car, some are 2 car, in a 3-story building organized around a central driveway, 2 of which will be affordable, provided at below market rates to meet the 20% BMR requirement of a PHZ project. Again, as a PHZ project, they are requesting exceptions as they are not able to meet the zoning code requirements to provide housing units that we need in the city. And the exceptions they are requesting include a 1.86 floor area ratio where 1.25 is allowed, as this is a housing inventory site. 58% lot coverage where 50% is allowed, a 0-foot 3-inch rear setback where 10 feet would normally be required. The provided usable open space varies for the private open space from 79 square feet to 155 square feet, where 150 square feet per unit is required. And lastly, the project does not meet the ground level landscaping requirements. Next slide. This slide shows the site plan and the floor plan. On the site plan, I would like to just point out and explain that the project has 5-foot side setbacks along each side, but the site is surrounded by a residential fence on those sides, as well as an entry gate at the front. Because of where the entry gate is located, staff has some concerns about cars queuing entering into the gate area. The proposed solution from the applicants were to add bulb outs that could hold both some of the utility boxes as well as street trees. However, staff does not support this design as it removes street parking. Additionally, although this is a 3-story building, I only included the 2nd-story floor plan on this site, and that was to show where the private open space is located on 2nd-floor balconies that overlook the central driveway courtyard. Additionally, to the rear of this site, so the bottom of the site plan, as you can see, is what is currently a delivery and parking corridor for Town and Country. Next slide. This shows 2 of the renderings of the sides of the building. The top image is the front entry as seen from Encina Avenue with the gate and the view into the central courtyard. The bottom image is the left side view as you would view from the Town and Country parking lot entrance. The photo or the image on the left is a rendering of the rear of the proposed project, showing Town and Country, one of those buildings in the foreground, and the delivery and parking corridors. And the final image on the right is the view from Encina Avenue on the other side of the building. The key considerations for the PTC to discuss this evening include the proposed land use, the site development regulations, the relationship to Town and Country as it relates to building scale and architecture, as well as the relationship to Town and Country for operations and land use of the current shopping center, the proposed bulb outs on Encina Avenue, and the reduced usable open space proposed in this project. We have received public comments from Ellis Partners, who is the operators of Town and Country. These letters are included as an attachment in the staff report, but a summary of their comments include concerns about late night and early morning operations that are a standard part of their current operations, including site maintenance such as power washing, refuse pickup, which starts at 4 a.m. on some days, as well as deliveries to the shops and restaurants. They are also concerned about parking, such as guests of residents in the new project parking in the Town and Country parking lot, as well as the overall architectural compatibility between the two sites. The staff recommendation is for the PTC to provide comments on the draft project plans and to recommend that the applicant move the project to the Architectural Review Board for review. Thank you. This concludes my presentation, and the applicants also have a presentation. Thank you.
Chair.
Thank you. Yes.
Sorry, so just one clarification or distinction from the report. AB 2097 is a state law that this property is within 100 or a half mile distance, but the project itself is not necessarily constrained by that because it is a planned home zoning application and therefore a legislative process. In this particular project, it may not be consequential as they are providing parking, but I just wanted to note that distinction. This is a legislative action before the council.
Okay, thank you.
Commission.
Just quickly, I see a light from my colleague, Commissioner Templeton. Is that a ghost light or no? Okay. Okay, question. Do we want to wait until after we hear from the applicant, or do you want to ask right now? Okay, go ahead.
I noticed in the packet, on packet page 15, you had different numbers for the floor area ratio than you had in your presentation. Can you please speak to that? Thank you.
Yes, so the 0.5 that is mentioned on page 15 of the packet was the standard CC zoning floor area ratio. However, because this is a housing inventory site in the housing element, it is subject to the floor area in 1814, which is 1.25.
Thank you. Any other quick questions right now before we hear from the applicant? Okay. Ms. Dow, do you want to change the timer so that the applicant has a
full 10 minutes?
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, commissioners. My name is Jeff Galbraith. I'm a partner at Hayes Group Architects, and I'm excited to be here and present the project to you today and hear your feedback. As Emily reviewed, we're proposing a townhome project on Encina Avenue. The site, as she summarized, is located south of Palo Alto Medical Foundation, just north of the Town and Country Shopping Center and between the Caltrain line and El Camino Real. There are some really significant benefits to this site for multifamily. First among them is that it's a tremendously underutilized site, right? It's been surface asphalt parking for 50 to 70 years. And it's also been confirmed by both Town and Country and the city of Palo Alto that these two parcels, which for decades have been leased by Town and Country, are no longer required to meet their parking requirements. And I think as a city, we can do and should do a lot better with them than surface parking. They also benefit from proximity to a wide range of services, as well as transportation opportunities. Here's a graphic map of that. You can see the small white square in the center of your screen and concentric rings around it. The first ring is a quarter-mile distance, but very easy to walk out your door and access whatever's there, which includes Town and Country and all the wonderful amenities that are there, as well as Palo Alto High School and the Medical Foundation, and even gets you into the edges of downtown go a half mile, still a very walkable distance, and you're well within downtown Palo Alto, University Avenue. You start to pick up parks, other schools. Everything green is a park, everything orange is a school, right? Purple is public facilities, and of course you have Stanford University and the hospital. So hard to beat, really, in terms of proximity to services that people would need. Also significant is that in this area, there's no adjacent single-family residential opposition. And what you'll have seen over the last 5 or 10 years is many housing projects try and come forward and get knocked down when they try and wrestle with, okay, how do we deal with the scale and the implications and the zoning that happen when you're within 150 feet of single-family residential. In this project, as you know, we have opted to bring the scale down for other reasons, but I think in general, this area is ripe for housing for all of these regions. And in the case of this lot, the alternative you have to understand is a small office building, right? Based on the zoning that we have in place, retail doesn't make a lot of sense in this site, given that there's so much next door, right, with Town and Country. So it's office or housing. Just a brief overview, and Emily already covered some of this, but we've been at this for 2.5 years already. We submitted our first package in May of 2022, had our first city council hearing in September of that year. Based on the feedback we got and primarily objections from Town and Country, we went back to the drawing board. We made as much revisions as we felt we could with that concept, and came to them, and it wasn't deemed sufficient. So we had to really go back to the drawing board and start completely over. And we looked at a number of different ways to try and get housing on this site, and we worked with general contractors to price them, structural engineers to help us find efficient ways to build them, and ultimately we came to the solution that we have before you today. We've been to preliminary ARB, DRCs, a lot of back and forth with the city, and we're thrilled to be here with you today. The key challenges for the project have been just the financial feasibility. There are also a lot of existing utilities on this site, far more than we find in a typical project that we've had to work around. And of course, the objections from Town and Country Village. So the concept that we came to was the 3-story townhomes. There's a lot of efficiency in the construction, the elimination of elevators and stairs and things you have to build in a podium style project that help offset the loss, right, when you reduce the number of units. So we're proposing a project with 10 units overall, 20% of which would be below market rate per the PHC requirements. Again, brief just plan. You can see how everything is organized around a central courtyard. The orange 2 units are the BMR units. We've parked 2 cars in as many of the units as we could. Each unit has its own private garage as well. And that central courtyard space, although because of the way the municipal code is written, we cannot count it towards usable open space. It is space that we envision as being very much used by the tenants. And there are projects, one we have on the screen here, it's a great example of that. There are things you can do, enlarging that space a little bit, bringing in landscaping, changing the materials, and making it a space that's usable, particularly when you have so few units, right, and less cars coming in and out. Just a quick run through of the images. This is the front facade facing Encina Avenue. The corner of the building there, looking sort of eastward down Encina to pick up the rhythm of the individual units expressed in the pitched roofs. This building really lays along a current ingress into the backside of Town and Country, and so actually creates an element that brings you in and relates to that path. This is the front view coming into the gates, into the central courtyard, and the courtyard itself as we envision it. And then back out to the exterior. The side yards are also space that initially was usable space, but was required by fire department to be provided for access for firefighting activities. Okay, and lastly, to touch on the objections that we've worked through with Town and Country, in the initial 2022 submittal, Their letter outlined their primary objective as, quote, really being about the scale. As they said, quote, "We would support a thoughtfully designed 2 or 3-story structure. Our objection is to the height and massing of this proposed development." Following a more recent and the current submittal design concept, they've raised some additional concerns. One is about the lack of setbacks and the implied issues around noise, which relate to trash, recycling, compost, maintenance, and tenant activities. And frankly, these are things that we deal with in every multifamily project. We've done many mixed-use projects that are close to sources of noise. The Cal Green, which is a code that we're all subject to, actually dictates noise levels that are allowed within a residential unit. And so as a matter of course on this project, we will and always would hire an acoustical engineer to come to the site to take measurements of the actual noise levels throughout usually several days. And then they would make recommendations on facades, acoustical glazing, things needed in order to maintain that noise limit within the residential units. So we don't see that as a concern or a unique problem of this site. And also, frankly, the Caltrain and El Camino truck traffic are probably as much or more of a noise contributant as anything else. They've also raised some concerns about parking and about our potential tenants' use of Town and Country lot. I think it's important to understand that there is street parking available on Encina Avenue. And even if you take the portion east of the Opportunity Center, there's room for roughly 40 cars along that space. So having a visitor or two come, I think, is certainly within the realm of reason that they could use some of those spaces. And lastly, there was some concern raised in their most recent letter about congestion on Encina Avenue, driving people to, or our residents to go through Town and Country rather than go around it. And we love Town and Country. I think we've all driven through it. It's efficient, but it's not necessarily the fastest way to get where you're going. And there's not a lot of traffic on Encina. So there you have. Happy to hear any questions you have, and really anxious to hear your feedback. So thank you.
Thank you. So I think now would be a good time for clarifying questions from the commission. All right, I have Commissioner Aiken, then Commissioner Templeton.
Thank you, Chair. So I have questions both for the applicant and for staff. Perhaps I'll start with the applicant if that's acceptable. There is concern about the bulb outs. So one thing that I would like to know is where else could the transformer be placed? For example, could it be put in a vault under the driveway? Or have you considered other options?
Yeah, we've looked at a lot of options. So under the driveway, so we can't put it underneath building. The utility department needs to be able to, in the event that the transformer fails, right, be able to crane or lift out and replace that unit. And so the options that we have currently, if we can't fit in the bulb out, right now we're looking to see if there's a way to bring it closer, maybe get it onto the sidewalk. There are clearances required around it. Usually it's about 3 feet past the size of the vault box itself. So whether we can make that work overhead, I'm not entirely sure yet, but we're looking at that. We have studied potential ways to carve out a corner of the site and the project itself to accommodate an above ground transformer. It's really disruptive, right, on the project. It sort of takes out a corner unit and really breaks down the rhythm of the facade. So we're hunting to find a better solution to that.
Okay, thank you. Next, is there an elevator in the accessible unit? I might have missed it, but I didn't see one in the drawings.
No, there is not. Okay. So there's a potential for a tenant if they move in and they need to add something. There are some products that can be used to move you up a stair. Technically, though, by the letter of the code, that unit is not required to have an elevator in it to qualify for the Chapter 11A requirements for accessibility.
Okay, and my last question is about, I'd like some help understanding how the BMR units will be priced. So I don't know who might be the right person to ask about that. For example, the low-income unit is supposed to be affordable for households at 51 to 80% of AMI. So is this priced so that the expense fits 30% of the high end of the range or the low end of the range or the income of the household that buys it or something else altogether?
So, and I'm certainly would love to hear from Jonathan Late as well on that. But the PHZ language that was established years ago kind of outlines a few different approaches to that. And there are clear targets established for low income, lower income, and those target ranges of the AMI. And so then there are calculations that work backwards to figure out what price fits within that salary range.
Okay. My remaining two questions are for staff. Thank you. About the equivalence of market rate and below market rate units, I don't quite understand from the packet how the parking would have to change in order for the units to be considered equivalent to the market rate units. Could you enlighten me about that?
So essentially, the below market rate units need to be considered equivalent and shouldn't be essentially less than the standard market rate units. And so in this case, although probably one of the two could be one of the units that has less parking, at least one of them to be like equal distribution would need to be one of the two parking units, two parking space units.
Okay, thank you. And last question for me is, does the location of this new residential use trigger any provisions of the noise ordinance that don't already apply? And I was wondering about 9.10.040, which is the commercial noise ordinance, commercial noise section. Previously, we had no one to issue a complaint if the decibel limits were not being met by the activity around the back of the town and country buildings. Now we do. So is there anything we need to watch out for there that we haven't evaluated?
I'm taking a quick skim through the code to make sure that the answer that yes, so the PAMC 9.10, the noise ordinance 030 is residential property noise and 040 is commercial property noise. The way that it is written, the noise limits are for the use on that site. It's not regulated by what it is adjacent to.
Okay, so the issue there was the equipment noise has a distance constraint applied to it. I don't want to get into this in too much detail at this point. I really just wanted to flag this as something that would be worth checking up on. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got Commissioner Tambleton, then Lou, then Heckman.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you to staff and to the applicant for good presentations. I have a couple of context questions that will vary about who answers it, but I want to start with the applicant's answer. What is my understanding of reading through the letters and the previous engagement with the council and things like that, is that part of the town and country village frustration is that, and don't expect you to answer for what's happening to them, but just to provide the context, that they've been subjected to a tremendous number of constraints. And even though this property is considered technically within town and country village, we're seeing a different set of constraints for this project. So one, I just want to understand to what extent are these like design constraints, because this looks very different than town and country village, part of your consideration and your negotiations with town and country village that you can share?
Well, in terms of constraints that they're subject to, I don't think, I think it's fair to say that if they wanted to, right, and if they're land lease, because they're ground lease, right, the property, they don't own it directly, but If the owner was amenable, they could develop the whole backside similarly, right? They could build a parking structure that replaced the parking, and they could put forth their own PHZ that would fill the entirety of that back parking area. That isn't of interest to them, it doesn't seem, and doesn't fit within their business plans, that's fine. But I think in that instance, you can see that the regulations that apply would be actually the same, right? It's a question of what you want to do with the land.
So there's not, and maybe this is a question for staff. So there's not some constraint that says you have to make town and country properties look like town and country looks right now, which is a certain style that's different than this style. Can you speak to that?
The city does not have a city-adopted set of design guidelines for town and country. However, there are other considerations, such as if the town and country shopping center got evaluated for being a potential historic resource, that could identify character-defining features that the city may have an interest in preserving.
So in Mr. Pop's letter, when he's talking about the constraints of making sure town and country looks the way it does, that's not happening?
It would be a subjective process if town and country were to apply to make architectural changes to their building.
But his claim is that those architectural constraints would apply to anything within the property, including this new development. So can you clarify that? It's confusing and we're being asked to make a decision based on that. So just as clear as we can be, that would be helpful.
So maybe just a process question, and I'll ask Emily to follow up on the other piece. So just for tonight, we're not asking the commission to make any decisions about anything other than to continue, either decide to move the project forward to the architecture review board for more review and then back to the PTC for additional review. And we've heard a couple of comments already that we'll come back to and be able to respond. And this may be one of them as well, but I want to give Ms. Callis a chance to respond.
The way that the zoning code.
Maybe we can take that question and have a quick little powwow on that as we hear some other questions, okay? And come back to you on that.
Sure, yeah. And the reason I think it's relevant is what we want to recommend is something that can go forward and is harmonious with the site. And that means including understanding better the frustrations of the neighbors. And so it is relevant for that reason. The other thing I wanted to understand is the reduction of the height, and maybe you have an answer and maybe you don't. It's okay if you don't. What is the driver there from your negotiations? Is that something that has occurred because of fear of using nearby parking spaces that could be used for town and country, or other reasons? Do you have any sense of what was driving that? I know 2022 is a while ago. We've had a lot of changes and different understanding of our housing needs since then. So I just was hoping to understand that better.
Yeah. So there's two pieces to that. One is after our initial meetings with Town and Country, after we scaled it down a little bit, we carved out 2 units and tried to sort of step the building back. And that just wasn't seen as being enough of a cutback. And so then you start to have to grapple with the financial realities of a project, right? Any project that has, like many of our projects are what we call a podium level of the ground floor, right, where oftentimes you'd have your parking, maybe some retail area, and then residential units on top. There's a significant cost in building the podium. It's more expensive construction, it's concrete, you have to have shared stairs that go to the roof, you have to have an elevator, you lose space for a lobby. And so in order to overcome those costs of a project, you have to have enough density to offset it. And as soon as you take out a couple of units, the equation falls apart. And now you need a whole new strategy to
Okay.
work.
And that's why you had such a big change.
Yeah.
Are you satisfied with how it's shaping up now?
We're still excited about the project.
Good.
We think
Okay.
it'll still be a great project.
Okay. Have you received, well, okay, it's the last question and then we'll see if Mr. Lee is ready. Have you received any stylistic feedback from Town and Country about the design being so different?
You know, everybody has their opinions
Yeah,
about,
of course they do.
about what it should look like. I think, yes, they've had some feedback, but everybody's going to have a different idea about what makes it compatible, right? I think one thing to be cognizant of is you wouldn't want to try and make these look like Town and Country, right? Because you'd be making houses look like retail, right? Which they aren't. And then you immediately have some programmatic incompatibilities between, you know, long slung out terraces, right? With a lot of glass at the ground floor, looking into residential units. There's just, it makes sense that the units read like residential units, right, rather than commercial space. And I think we've made a number of moves, whether it's using similar materials and color, the board and batten in sort of a dark gray, the use of some heavier timber frame elements around the ground level, especially that kind of tie in to that frame that's visible, right, surrounding Town and Country. So I think we've made a lot of gestures in that
Thanks
direction.
for sharing that and giving us an additional context. Thank you. Director Light, did you have anything you want to add at this point, or do you want to move on and come back later?
Yeah, I'll maybe answer it partially so, but maybe enough to get you some perspective. Through this particular process, through the planned home zoning process, there's the requirement to go to the Planning Commission and then on to the Architectural Review Board. And through the Architectural Review Board's review for of the project relative to its setting, there could be some guidance from the Architecture Review Board to either be distinguished from the Town and Country design or to become similar to, designed similar to the Town and Country design. So that is an element of discretion that could apply in this process.
That would happen at the ARB.
But it would likely happen at the Architecture Review Board.
Last question is for staff, probably. The discussion around the Encina parking. I have been there frequently and it's always full. Do we have any concerns about the availability for visitor parking there?
Can you clarify if you mean on the street or?
Yes, I'm referring to on the street because I don't believe that there's any building off of Encina where we can park. We only have the lot that we're discussing.
So there is the number of public parking spaces on the street that exist. Unfortunately, I don't know exactly what that number is, but that is why we are not recommending that the bulb outs be provided, since that would further reduce street parking.
Are you anticipating street parking being part of this project? Because both of you guys mentioned it. So just trying to understand.
Street parking is not part of this project, and no street parking would be required towards the required number of parking spaces when we are looking at a project that has a more prescriptive number of parking spaces that are required. The street parking is separate.
Thanks.
Commissioner Liu?
Yeah, thank you. Commissioner Aiken already asked most of my questions. I'll just have a couple questions. One follow-up on a question that Commissioner Aiken asked. In the staff report, it says that 2 of the BMR units have reduced parking. So they're the units with 1 space. I think in the applicant's proposal presented here tonight, there's 1 3-bedroom with 2 parking spaces and also the other 3-bedroom in the bottom right corner. So I just want to confirm that that has been updated and that the staff report, that reference to parking is no longer accurate. Is that right?
If the applicant could can we pull up the applicant presentation again that highlighted the BMR units and see if that is staff's understanding of which units would be be the BMR units?
Yeah, Emily, if you have the packet there handy, the plan as we have it here is that this unit here, both the two units in orange. So one of them would be a 2 parking space and one of them would be the 1 parking space.
And how many bedrooms is the top one?
Oh, the top one is 3 bedroom.
And the bottom?
Bottom one is 2 bedroom.
Okay, so staff, is that your understanding as to what was included in the application?
I believe this is a change from what was
Is it?
submitted in August.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there may be a mismatch there. We can circle back and make sure we've got it synced up.
Okay, and then while we're on that topic, because I had a clarifying question about that too. So staff, when you are trying for equivalency, are you then averaging, like, how do you, given that some units have 2 spaces and some units have 1, and then the bedroom sizes are also different, how do you determine equivalency in terms of parking spaces for a BMR unit?
So this is something that will continue to be refined as a part of the design. The intent for this initial PTC meeting is for the plans to be conceptual, and they are expected to come closer to, staff recommendation and conformance with the code and that sort of thing. In terms of that level of technical detail, we do have another planner on staff who is the housing planner that helps us determine that it's meeting all of those regulations. So I can't quite answer that level of specificity, but I don't know if Jonathan has more information on that.
I'll just note that the code has some guidance for us on that. I'm sorry. Yeah, I think you asked a question. The code has some guidance on that. So I'm actually trying to look that up right now, but it's in addition, so we'll look at those standards, but you raise a point that there's an element of art, I guess, that's involved in it if the code isn't so specific about it. But again, I want to acknowledge that this is a planned home zoning application and a legislative project. So it's something that is part of the discussion that the commission and ultimately city council could have about it. Our goal and intent is to have it be aligned with the code in terms of that rough proportionality of being similar to other units in the development.
And just to add a little bit of context based on codes that I'm familiar with in other agencies, rather than specifically here, when you have a housing development that has a variety of different houses, proposed different sized houses, if you find that the BMR units are just the 2 smallest ones or the ones with the least parking, then that stands out as a concern that if you've got more than 1 BMR unit, then you're going to want to have them in different categories in terms of unit types.
Commissioner Liu, did you have more questions?
Yes, I had a couple of hopefully quick questions. So on packet page 15, the staff guidance is that while the PTC can discuss setbacks and how it's adjacent to the delivery corridor, or how we can discuss open space, that is potentially not recommended and in the scope of the ARB. I just want to confirm what is productive for us to actually discuss on those topics, and just get context on that staff guidance.
We would like the PTC to be able to provide comments in terms of, making some recommendations to the ARB for what they can consider. The intent is that, because the project does evolve between now and the next time it comes to the PTC, we want to make sure that any comments you have and like some of your intents are captured and considered as it moves forward to the ARB process. But we don't, the certain level of detail, if the recommendation is for them to be 6 feet wide instead of 5, like that might not necessarily, it might be too granular for this time.
Yeah, and if I could just echo that. Yeah, so absolutely, if the commission has a concern about setbacks or open space or any of those items, you should flag that for at least whether it's a concern or something that you want to further study. Provide that note to us, and we could also discuss that with the ARB. What I wouldn't want the commission to do is have a concern about something and not flag that until later, because the project is going to continue to get refined and as it goes through the process. But I agree with Ms. Foley. You don't have to get down to a level of specificity.
Thank you, and I will not. One last question. With bike lanes coming to El Camino and terminating at Encina, and of course the Embarcadero bike path being right there, Encina will be a significant bike corridor. And I think it's mentioned in the staff report, but not so much in the presentation tonight, that there are also bike lane concerns about the bulb out. Can you talk about any planning or any discussions that might currently exist on potential bike connectivity between El Camino bike lanes and Embarcadero?
I do not have that information right now. It is my understanding that there is a bike lane, at the end of Encina running near this site, but I'm not sure that was part of your question.
Yeah, so we can. I know that the Office of Transportation is looking at updates to its bicycle plan, and I think what we could do is we've written that note, and we can examine how this project is either inconsistent with that or where there might be some concerns relative to that.
Yeah, makes sense. Just wanted to confirm there weren't any extra discussions that we could be aware of. Thank you.
Commissioner Heckman, and then after that, Commissioner Rectal.
So this one is the staff packet, page 15, top of the page, states that improvements could be made with regard to the amount of green space and circulation. And I'm wondering if that's just a general impression comment that this project can do better, or does it reflect that staff has some ideas about how things might be improved? And if that's the case, has that been part of a dialogue with the applicant?
So that comment was also something that came up when this went to preliminary architectural review in December. And so I anticipate that ARB will continue to have that comment as this project progresses forward.
Okay. Further down, same page, packet page 15, I'm just trying to understand the bicycle parking. And I couldn't exactly tell, but it looks like maybe there were bike parking racks in the bulb outs. Is that where they were proposed?
I can take a look at the plans. I know that some of that, the bulb outs were not a part of the initial submittal. They got added in cycle 2. And so there had always been bike racks proposed as part of the project, but their location may have changed.
Okay, but I think the concern staff is expressing here, whether they're in the bulb outs or in the sidewalk, which is city property right in front of the parcel, they need to be, a space needs to be found for them on the private property. I think is that the gist of what?
Yes, minimum sidewalk widths need to be maintained.
Okay. Okay. Let's see, the equivalent BMRs, actually, I thought this was, it sounds like this is, if it was a problem, it may have already been solved. It's just getting some clarification between the applicant and staff as to what's being proposed. But the discussion of whether parking is part of the equivalency analysis is kind of interesting in this era where, you know, we are seeing state legislation about unbundling parking. And so I'm wondering if, in looking at this issue, if staff is thinking about whether parking needs to be bundled with the unit for the purpose of the equivalency analysis.
It is my understanding that for condominium units providing individual garages, the bundling does not apply.
Yeah, and I would say, so that's the state law provision where there's the, a bundling from apartments and things like that. But I think what we would, to answer your question, we would look at the project that's being proposed and what amenities are being available to each of the units there. And we would base it on that, as opposed to broader, local or regional, state, policies related to parking. We just want to see that the BMR units are being treated in a similar context to the rest of the units that are there, that are being proposed as part of the development.
Okay. All right. Let's see. The next question, I saw there was a concern from the owners of Town and Country, Ellis Partners, about guest parking occupying their retail parking spots. And I wanted to ask, so this is going to be a condominium project. There typically with a condominium project is a requirement that they have a set of CC&Rs. Is that something that would be required of this project?
Residential CC&Rs are handled when the project applies for the tentative map for condominium purposes, which we do not yet have on file for this project, but would be required as a condition of approval before it moves to building permits.
Okay.
If it gets approved.
Yeah. So eventually, if this project goes forward, they'll have a set of CC&Rs. And is a prohibition of resident or guest parking on adjacent private property of Town and Country something that the city could require be included in the CC&Rs?
Yes, although it is a private parking lot, so it already wouldn't be able to be used for public parking use?
Yeah, we could add, there could be a condition added, and there could be a condition that requires it to be incorporated into the CC&R, so that when people were purchasing those units, they would understand that that's not an area for parking.
Okay, because it seems like that might be a pretty simple solution to, what seems like a legitimate concern. All right. My last question is really, are the city regulations associated with Town and Country really a constraint for this project? And this is, this is kind of a variation on what Commissioner Templeton was talking about. So on packet page 23, we have 4 Town and Country policies from our comp plan. And when I look at this parcel, while it has been used as a part of the parking for Town and Country, it's separate ownership, and now it's not being used. It's proposed to not be used to have really any relationship to Town and Country. And when I look at the language of the 4 policies, 412 says at this site. 413 and 14 say in Town and Country Village. And B6.6 says retain Town and Country. And the staff comment is this property is adjacent to Town and Country. And so which I think is accurate. And so what I'm wondering is, did staff, I'm wondering 2 things. First, we have other developments in our not too distant past that are adjacent to Town and Country. I think the Opportunity Center is not so old. And so I'm wondering if these 4 policies were applied in its development as an adjacent property, or any other kind of newer construction along Encina, because I think there's at least one other newish building. But I'm wondering if staff considered whether these policies were truly applicable to this parcel, and if so, what led them to, decide that, we really should include them because this is part of Town and Country.
So we did consider that in both the comprehensive plan and in the zoning code. It defines Town and Country as the parcels bounded by Encina, El Camino, the Caltrain right-of-way, and the fourth street that I should recall the name of, but yeah, Embarcadero, there we go.
Okay, and then,
And because of that reason, sorry to interrupt, but the parcels on the other side of the street, such as the Opportunity Center, are not included in that.
understood. Okay, all right. And then, so that being, I guess one suggestion is maybe change that word adjacent as this moves forward through the process in your analysis to avoid anyone else as nitpicky as me being confused by that. But then if that's the case, if it's part of Town and Country, I guess staff has decided that residential isn't a non-starter here because B6.6 says retain it as local serving retail center. So this project that's being proposed isn't local serving retail. But as staff decided that, and again, I'm not remembering the housing element and whether housing is a possibility on Town and Country, a mixed use in the foreseeable future. But staff has decided that housing can happen here consistent with policy B6.6.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Those are my questions. Thanks.
Commissioner Rectal.
Okay, so all these units are either 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom. And one of the goals of our housing element was to encourage larger units that can support families. Has the applicant considered adding a 4th floor to part or all of the development to add more bedrooms?
Assume that's to me. There's two challenges with that. I mean, one is now you've got a 4-story townhome, right, with more floors to go up and down. Then you have the implications of potentially more cars to park, even though AB 2097 doesn't require it. And then you have the height problem, right? We felt compelled to come down to a 3-story project to get past the objections of Town and Country.
Okay. Does Town and Country have a legal constraint on this, or are you just trying to be a good neighbor?
No, so when we went to City Council for our pre-screening hearing, our mandate from City Council was to work to find a solution that would be acceptable to both parties.
Okay. But it doesn't come for free in that we're giving up housing for this. All right. We're giving up bedrooms for this. And so the housing element really wants to have a wide variety of different units. Could you have just the part near Encina be 4 stories and have a step up?
So another challenge that we have is firefighting access. So along Encina, there are power poles and there are 2 elevations of power. At something like between 30 and 40 feet, there are the regular distribution lines that feed the buildings in the area. And then up at about 50 feet or more, there are what we call transmission lines that are carrying power at much higher voltages to farther distances. And so in working with the fire department, we've had several meetings with them. They were willing to back off on having what's known as aerial access, right, to reach certain heights, which they often use a truck that has a ladder on it. It's not safe for them to push past 3 stories, right, and get too close to those transmission lines. So as part of a project, we're undergrounding the lower lines, which allows them to reach the 3rd story. There's also, frankly, because they're not using the aerial truck, they are limited to ladders that they stand on the ground, and there are codified limits of how high the windowsill can be that they would need to get to rescue someone. And so that really does limit us to 3 stories.
Okay, so it's not as trivial as it seems.
No, yeah.
Okay. Can we go to slide 7?
Is this slide 7 of the applicant presentation or of the staff
report?
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, and that right-hand view there, we have some street trees, and then we also have some trees along the front side or closest to us. Are those part of the development, or are those just artistic?
So if you sort of read the corner of the building, right, there's the facade facing the parking lot, and all of the trees that are in front of that facade really live within the Town and Country parking lot. And then all of the trees on the right half of the image that are on Encina, those would live in the bulb outs. The sidewalk in Encina is 6 feet, right, between the street curb and the property line. And so with that amount of space, there really isn't room to host street trees and maintain the required 4-foot sidewalk width. So if we lose the bulb outs, we probably lose the trees on that facade.
Okay, so the only trees that are part of this are the ones along Encina.
Yeah, and the ones internal to the courtyard.
Okay. Yeah, that's a little deceptive because it makes it look like this is, one of my concerns here is that this isn't, oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Have you considered other ways of increasing trees, whether, I guess roof decks are the same problem as 4 stories? Okay. Okay, and then my only other, I guess, question was about bike parking and visitor bike parking, I think is important. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Suma, questions, please, clarifying questions.
Yes, this is a question for staff. So this is kind of in the middle of the park, and it's parking lot for Town and Country on one side and parking lot for Town and Country on the other side. Are those necessary parking for Town and Country to operate the 2 remaining parking lots once this is built? And does Town and Country lease those, or are they? Does that make sense?
Yes. So we have looked at the parking for Town and Country, and currently there are spaces in the lots on either side of the subject property that are counted towards their required parking.
Okay.
The owners, I believe I included some of that information in the report. And we don't believe at this time that the parking's likely to change in the near future.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think that brings us to an end for our clarifying questions. So I don't see any others from, all right. So we are on to the public comment portion of the program. Are there speaker cards, please, Ms. Dow?
Yes, I have 3 cards. First is from Dean Rubinson.
Please come up.
Thank you. How much time do I have?
You got 5 minutes.
All right, my name is Dean Rubinson. I'm the Director of Development for Ellis Partners. I've been overseeing all planning, design, and construction in Town and Country for the last 19 years. And I'm deeply concerned about the impact of this project on Town and Country. For the last 2 years, we have consistently raised our concerns about the project that has landed from out of nowhere, essentially, onto a 1/4 acre in the middle of our north parking lot. We clearly understand the need for added housing in Palo Alto and throughout the region, and we really do appreciate the reduction in height proposed by the applicant. But we remain with many concerns, as noted in our letter, focused on architectural compatibility and the serious operational conflicts that will occur if this project is built. You'll be hearing shortly from Randy Pop, who has been advising us on the architectural impacts, and we have provided a letter outlining our concerns about the myriad of noise and parking conflicts that the project will create. Commissioner Heckman mentioned that parking may occur on our property, overflow parking, and we have rules that overflow parking or public parking who are not our constituents can't park there. That doesn't stop it from happening. CC&Rs within their condos are also not going to stop it from happening. We're going to end up having to enforce it and tow people, and we're trying to avoid creating more conflict and constraint by suggesting that there be more parking on this site. In short, their zero lot line approach offers inadequate buffering from early morning truck noise, and provides only 16 stalls of parking for 28 bedrooms with 0 guest parking. As we mentioned, overflow parking will naturally become our problem, as Encina is generally full with PAMF workers and others at other times of the day. Given the setting, this project is just too dense. We believe it may be okay to put housing in this location, but only with the appropriate setbacks and buffers to accommodate these two adjacent uses in a more harmonious manner. We think the ARB's direction to reduce the density and increase the setbacks should be followed, and feel that it can be achieved with limited impact on their unit count and unit sizes. But perhaps 10 3-bedroom condos at $2 million each just isn't the right approach for this 1/4 acre lot. It is certainly not worth taking the risk on the vitality and attractiveness of our neighborhood treasure, for which the city and its constituents have established 5 specific provisions in the comp plan to protect. Lastly, I'd like to clarify that staff's intended use of a CEQA exemption for infill projects that are deemed consistent with the comp plan is wholly inappropriate. There are 10 comp plan notice policies noted in the staff report, 5 of which specifically relate to Town and Country. It is plainly clear that this project is not consistent with them. The obvious issues relate to the lack of compatibility with surroundings and scale, the lack of new greenery and plazas, prohibiting conversion of Town and Country to residential, lack of preservation of Town and Country in its pedestrian scale, lack of maintaining and enhancing its vibrant retail use and urban greening, and maintaining and adding trees at Town and Country. They're removing 8 thriving trees, paying in lieu fees to support the trees that they don't have adequate room for, and then putting additional trees on city property and bulb outs. The city may choose to approve this project, hopefully after major revisions, but to say that it is currently consistent with the comp plan to allow a notice of exemption by virtue of that consistency is certainly not appropriate. Furthermore, the site is designated community commercial in the comp plan and not residential, meaning that the impacts of a dense residential project at this location have not undergone environmental review. We ask that you require major revisions to the applicant, that they perhaps return to PTC after the revisions, or at least return to the ARB after making such revisions. And we ask the staff to revisit the legality of applying such a CEQA exemption. So I've got 30 seconds left. I just want to make a couple of clarifications. So we do have adequate parking in the remaining spaces to meet the code. We've leased this site, this 1/4 acre site, since we bought it in 2004. We have offered to continue to lease this site for parking, which, while we don't need it for code reasons, we would happily spend the money continuing to lease it to ease the parking demand and to make it more efficient for customers and the community. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is Randy Pop.
Good evening. My name is Randy Pop. I live at 375 Monroe Drive in Palo Alto, and I've been practicing as an architect in Palo Alto since 1987. I've worked on commercial and residential projects throughout Palo Alto and the region. My resume extends from many small ADUs to being the architectural project lead for the Toby Cret Campus for Jewish Life, including the Jewish Community Center and the integrated housing that surrounds. I'm briefly sharing this information to give you some context from my experience relative to the comments I've been offering regarding my concerns about the project you're considering tonight. I am a housing advocate, and I am generally in favor of almost anything we can do to increase the stock and variety in Palo Alto. That said, this project has been challenging for me to support from the onset. It will exist as an isolated building in the midst of a parking lot adjacent to one of our most valued and successful retail centers. When I served as chair of the ARB, I understood my role to be an interpreter of our regulations. I also appreciated the obligation entrusted in me to protect the aesthetic which makes up the fabric of our town. This project is far from being capable of meeting those standards. In my letter dated July 3, included at the end of your packet, I illustrated my continuing concerns for the character and scope of this project. It is out of balance and needs to be fundamentally modified to meet the goals of our regulations and to satisfy the necessary findings as I understand them. To summarize, The zero lot line massing creates tension and pressure at every edge. The interior courtyard is so tight, restricting vehicle movement and likely creating an echo chamber for both internally generated and off-site sound. The impact of the current configuration cannot be understated to those who might reside in the units. Issues surrounding privacy, logistics for trash disposal, fire access, and guest parking all seem to be an afterthought that are not yet resolved, and they must be. Finally, I find the required compatibility of the materials and colors to the adjacent context of Town and Country Village to be unresolved. Feedback provided to the applicant by the ARB has been largely ignored. I hope you'll carefully consider what a project like this means to our town. Every approval sets a precedent, and we must be critical and careful to maintain the standards that have been so thoughtfully crafted by staff and debated by you and your predecessors. The value of this project does not yet offset the concessions you are being asked to grant. I also want to just quickly, with a couple of minutes left here, address a comment that came up from Commissioner Templeton and Commissioner Heckman. I want to restate that the comp policy L412 states that the proposed development should, and I quote, sorry, my phone just jumped. Give me a second. Cancel. I'm sorry, I have to reopen this. I have 2 minutes, so I'll do it quickly. Do you have it there? Yeah, thank you so much. It states that it should recognize and preserve Town and Country Village as an attractive retail center serving Palo Altans and residents of the wider region. Future development at this site should preserve its existing amenities, pedestrian scale, and architectural character, while also improving safe access for bicyclists, pedestrians, and increasing the amount of bicycle parking. I just don't see how this project satisfies that requirement. This project is within the Town and Country boundary. It absolutely is. And the staff's interpretation differs from my understanding. And although I respect them and I'm not often at odds with them, in this particular case, I disagree with their interpretation. Thank you.
And
Speaker, please.
yes, next and last speaker is Bob Taylor.
Good evening, commissioners.
Mr. Taylor, could you please move the microphone closer to your, thank you very much.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Bob Taylor. My residence is at 480 Marlowe Street in Palo Alto. And I really appreciate the opportunity to advocate for the development proposed on this site. I am here both as a representative myself and also the owners of the land. First, as a longtime resident, I'm keenly aware of the need for housing in the downtown core. Lack of available housing causes increased traffic and parking issues in the neighborhoods. Addressing these needs starts with approving projects like this that provide BMRs and housing stock in a location that has been unproductive for 70 years. There aren't too many of those in Palo Alto. When a residential and commercial lot sells downtown and the structure is demolished, often we get just a larger and newer version of what was torn down. This project gives the community a chance to create housing on land that has never been developed in an ideal location close to transportation, services, and employment opportunities, while at the same time not impacting any residential community. This project provides a corresponding positive impact on neighboring properties by increasing retail sales, providing housing potentials for owners of the businesses in the vicinity and those who work at Palo Alto Medical Foundation. The family that owns this land has done so for 3 generations. The family still lives in Palo Alto. From the 1950s until just a few years ago, the land was rented as a parking lot to Town and Country Village. And that's to the previous owners, the Williams, and to the present operators under a leasehold, the Ellis Group. I represented 2 generations of the family as their family attorney and negotiated a dozen or more leases between the family and Town and Country Village. And contrary to what has been represented in the press, in 2022, the leaseholders operating Town and Country told me and the owners that they no longer needed to rent the parking lot, implying that they had sufficient parking without renting the parking lot they had rented for over 60 years. The leaseholder made a low offer for the land when it was offered for sale. The offer was the lowest of offers we received. I suspect the owner's rejection of their offer of the land and subsequent termination of the rental of the parking lot by the leaseholders was connected and not a coincidence. As someone working in the real estate industry in Palo Alto for the last 40 years, it is deflating to see that it takes over 2 years to develop a property in the city where the change in use seems so obvious. The last thing the downtown needs is another small boutique office building occupied by a venture capitalist. This medium density residential project seems to check all the boxes for what the community needs and wants. I strongly urge you to support the development as it is presented to you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Okay, I wondered if my colleagues want a very quick break, or do you want to keep going? No break. Okay. All right, then let's bring it back to the commission for comments. Light them up. I've got Commissioner Aiken, then Templeton, then Heckman.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm going to approach this as sort of the bad news, good news, and then on balance. I'm really unconvinced about the location of this project. These residents are going to be isolated in a housing desert and subjected to a lack of green space, a lack of privacy, and a lot of noise. The structure seems overbuilt for the lot, which makes it interesting for fire safety. And it creates problems for any future projects nearby. And I strongly suspect that if this project is successful, there will be future projects nearby. At the very least, I could see Town and Country developing parking structure and then more substantial mixed use or housing or even more retail developments in the remaining space. With regard to parking, of course, we're in an AB 2097 area here, so there's no parking that we can require, but it's still really interesting that 80% of the parking that would have been required is still being built in this project. And that tells me that there's demand for parking here. And that suggests that we will have problems with parking overflowing both onto Encina and into the Town and Country lots. So there will be an enforcement issue. The bulb outs look like a no-go to me, both because of issues like potential bike lane use, which I think is a very serious one, and as establishing a precedent for other developments. And lastly, on the negative side, I keep making this point, but I want to make sure that it's understood well. Our RENA requirements are for 40% of new units to be affordable to households at the 80% AMI level. This project offers us 10. So we can have a lot of projects like this and come nowhere close to meeting our affordability requirements. We have to be very careful about using the available space, the sites that we have, and not making full use of those. All right, now for the positives. The applicant has been responsive to several requests from Town and Country, and I trust that will continue. I feel pretty good about that. I think the present height is a good compromise. I really appreciate that one unit is accessible. And as Vice Chair Rectal mentioned, these units are 2 and 3 bedrooms, which are configurations we really, really want. So those are all pluses. And finally, just an aside, I'm always happy to see provisions for PV panels on the roof. So where I'm coming down at the moment is I definitely think we should forward this project to the ARB for further review. So I feel pretty comfortable with that. But when this comes back to us the next time, I really like to see more of those negatives addressed. So you have a good list for me now, and I will defer to my fellow commissioners for what their thoughts might be.
Commissioner Templeton.
Thank you so much, Chair. I appreciated some of the comments that Commissioner Aiken started with about his concerns, and I won't rehash those here, but I'd like to say, well, I have a quick question for staff. Do we need to find and make any findings in the comprehensive plan? It wasn't listed as a need. I just want to confirm.
No, not at this time.
Okay. If we had needed to do that, I would not be able to make the findings. I don't agree with your interpretation of 412 and 66. So L 412 and B 66, as per your own definition. These lots are within town and country. And it's very confusing, and I hope that you can make it clearer in the future why you differ from that. But the definition you provided of what is, quote, town and country includes this property. So that said, the part that Commissioner Aiken mentioned that I appreciated was that it doesn't yet feel comfortable to have this type of development in this space. And what I agree with on that, I mean, it does have restaurants, it does have shopping, it does have grocery stores, it does have transit. So in one sense, it doesn't feel like a desert, but the isolation of living in that community would be extremely unattractive to myself or many other people with families. Think about where the nearest school might be and how many large roads you might have to cross to get to them. It concerns me. So what I would love to see is some kind of vision that this would be a part of. So if this, if the Encina Road were somehow had several other plans in the queue and we could envision it fitting in, it might have a different resonance with our commission. But right now, what I'm hearing is as an isolated project and without any kind of encompassing vision other than town and country nearby, it's difficult to get on board with the development of this as a housing space. So that's my feedback. Would I, looking at the requests from staff on what you're looking for from us, you've had my comments, and whether it would go to the Architectural Review Board, I'd like to hear my colleagues' opinions on that. I'm not entirely sure that we're ready to move forward because we do still have some open questions. So I'm looking forward to your comments on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Templeton. Commissioner Heckman, then Lou, then Suma.
Thank you. So recognizing this is really, even though it's been 2 years, an early stage of commenting, at least for the PTC, we're going to see this again. And I think importantly, it's going to the ARB, or should, and I'm supportive of that being its next step. And I am conceptually supportive of this project. I wish I were looking at a 20-unit project, but the council looked at that and that ship has sailed. So we're looking at 10 units. And I appreciate that that in part reflects an effort to reach a some kind of compromise with the owners of Town and Country. So this is in our housing element, housing inventory site. That says so in our staff report. And so we have elements of our comp plan that promote housing on this site, even though it's inside the geographic boundaries that define Town and Country. But we also have these policies that are stated in our staff report that might suggest there shouldn't be housing on this site. So that's not at all unusual in a comp plan, because a comp plan is trying to address a variety of goals and policies, and often those can be in conflict and you have to try to harmonize them. And listening to staff's answers to my earlier questions, recognizing that this is in the housing element as a place where housing should go, I think staff is trying to do that. They're really trying to thread the needle and harmonize these competing interests that are reflected in our comp plan. And so I think when we get to it with a refined product here, that we'll be able to make the findings that relate to the comp plan. While it's true that this project would initially be isolated, I think that's kind of the short view, because in the longer term, more things are going to get built, and we may well see the owners of Town and Country, of the current or future owners, condensing their parking into a multi-level parking lot and building more. And that could be mixed use, residential over retail. And so I don't know that this would be out there alone forever. I do have concerns when we talk about any market rate development and waive the 40% overall affordability requirement of the RENA numbers, because I recognize that 40% is a blending that necessarily includes a fairly good chunk of 100% affordable projects, because no project like this can pencil out and provide 40% affordable. So they're providing 20, and that's what we require. And so on that issue, I'm satisfied. There are a lot of details to be worked out, but I think a lot of those really relate to the ARB. We need to find a way, you need to find a way to green this project up somewhat. I was wondering about green walls, right? Living walls, and whether those have, I see them from time to time, and I wonder if they, live, or if it's a good idea and you come back the next year and everything is it's a brown dead wall. But I'm trying to think creatively. I understand the site constraints, and of course we all recognize that to shrink this project without shrinking the number of units means you're shrinking the sizes of the units. And so, we have to find the right balance. And I think some of the commissioners' comments here suggest that we're not quite there yet, because there needs to be more space, more scale and greening. The gate issue, I think, is again, it's a problem that's going to need to be solved before we come back. As my understanding is the gate wants the applicant wants the gate to be at the property line, but that creates a queuing problem on the street, which the applicant tried to solve with these bulb outs, but staff isn't supportive of those. So we need a plan B. And I don't know if that gate has to move farther in. If it does, you've got the conflict with that first parking on each side. And so I'm not going to try to design from the dais, particularly as a non-architect, but I think that's something you just have to wrestle with some more and find a solution to it. Let's see, when I hear about the early morning noise it is not unique to have residential right next to retail. And in fact, it's becoming the model throughout California that you have residential over retail. And so when I read this, I guess my first thought was, how does Santana Row handle this? Because they've got a backside with garbage trucks and deliveries and all that stuff. And right on top of that, they've got residential. And so there have to be solutions out there. We just haven't heard them yet, but maybe when this comes back to us, we'll understand that. In terms of the no parking on the Town and Country parking lots, I appreciate the Ellis Partners representatives comments on that. It's an enforcement issue. But one of the nice things about a set of CC&Rs is generally because the city is requiring them, the city is requiring that they provide that they can be enforced by the city. And so if it becomes a problem, Town and Country has an ally generally in the city to enforce a condition of approval that they made. And so that maybe softens the responsibility. It's not a perfect solution. Cut through traffic, guilty. I've done it a number of times when I'm going to PAMF and I get stuck at the light. I've never, and I spent a lot of time in Town and Country, by the way. It's fantastic. I love that center. But I've never, all the time I spent there, I really haven't perceived that I've always perceived cut through traffic exists, but I've never felt that it really is disrupting the flow of the center. And I don't believe that 10 units at this location would have that effect. Let's see, the last thing is architectural compatibility. And this is really the purview of the ARB. So I'm just going to share my thoughts for what it's worth. First of all, Town and Country is charming, but where this project is located is not the charming part of Town and Country. This is the backside. This is the tuchus of Town and Country. And when I did my site visit, I actually never even noticed the backside, but it's a wall back there. And if you're standing by that wall, the only way you might know it's Town and Country is if you looked at the roof overhang above it. And so when I mentioned that I did a video meeting with the applicant, and when they showed me the front facade of that building on Encina, what I thought was, well, that's interesting because it doesn't look like classic housing. It has a little bit more of a commercial feel, which I thought tied nicely with what's across the street from it. And so that was kind of my impression, is that that's really what they were trying to accomplish. And then when you wrap the sides, you get more of this feel that is less commercial office-like. And I thought that was the nod of some kind of Town and Country. And I'm wondering if maybe there are some color scheme issues that could work there. But I don't think it's a fair bar to set that this should somehow look like the front of Town and Country when this is on the backside of Town and Country. So I'll be supportive of a motion to forward this to the ARB, and I'm looking forward to further refinements of the project consistent with their comments, which are already in the last round, already in the staff report. Thank you.
Commissioner Liu and then Commissioner Suma.
Thank you. I think housing is a good use here. It is a surface parking lot next to two amazing bike paths near Caltrain, right by the buses. I am also excited that there's family housing. These are mostly 3 bedrooms. The unit sizes are 14 to 1,600 square feet. It's like 2,000, I think, including the parking garages. These are really substantial units, like comparable to a single family home. And looking at the affordability levels for 3 or 4 occupants, these are, actually relatively affordable. The affordable units are certainly affordable for a couple of Palo Alto teachers, for example. So I want to give some context that I could dig up on the housing element. The housing element speaks to 2 above market rate units on this site. So we are pushing for more housing than the housing element actually commits to. I'm also correspondingly not actually sure like what the consequences would potentially be if we really push back on housing on this site, since it is a housing element site. But I'll also add that there are 5 housing element sites with frontage on Encina, and actually a 6th lot in the housing element that abuts one of those other 5 lots. So while I'm not actually convinced that those lots will actually develop into housing soon, there is some element of planning, or there is some general direction that these are in our housing element inventory, at least for this cycle and potentially next. Yeah, in general, I think this is the kind of housing we want to make easier. It's human scale. It's 10 units, so also kind of community scale. It's infill on a surface parking lot. It's 35 dwelling units per acre, which is not massively or intimidatingly dense, though I do wish there were more setbacks and more opportunity for greenery, and would want to watch out for that. On the negatives, though, I am worried. I'm definitely worried and opposed to the bulb out. I think it's a risky precedent given the other housing element sites that we have adjacent to Encina. I really care about bike connections. I think we should just rethink Encina more generally and not do a piece by piece bulb out and set that precedent. So I'm really grateful for Town and Country. I think this is a compatible use adjacent to Town and Country, though, and I would want to forward this to the ARB with those reservations that I would want to maximize green space. I would oppose the bulb out. And I would also like more clarity about or more commentary from staff about the definition of Town and Country in a future hearing. Thank you.
Commissioner Suma.
Thank you. I want to thank the applicant for being so responsive to Town and Country's concern with regards to the massing and scale of the building. And I do think it's odd because I do think this is potentially a really great place for housing because of its walkability. You can walk to restaurants, you can walk to a grocery store and pharmacy, but it just feels too tight on the lot. So that's a problem with setbacks and not enough green space. And I'm also concerned that the courtyard is very constrained. I think a member of the public mentioned that. And that the site will become, it could be hard to live in, actually. There is housing there already because the Opportunity Center has housing. I did want to mention, so that's a plus side. The bulb outs are a no-go for me because of taking the public right away and possibly preventing future bike lanes. The gate sounds pretty problematic. And without the bulb outs, there's no green at all. There's no trees on this site. So that's problematic, but it's tricky because it's actually a great place for housing in terms of its walkability. So I guess I don't see how this, I think there need to be a lot of changes for this project to work in this location. So I don't know if we get that by keeping it here at PTC longer. It feels like we get that by sending it to the ARB so they can make those changes because we are not a group of architects. But I am very concerned about how tight it is on the site. And yeah, I think the lack of green space and without the bulb outs, I don't even see, well, a lot of changes need to be made for it to work, and the bulb outs are a no-go for me.
Thank you, Commissioner Suma. And then we've got Vice Chair Rectal. And then I'd like to say something for our first round before we go on to second round with Commissioner Templeton. Okay, go ahead, Vice Chair.
Yeah, I have a question about the trash pickup. So we have the trash room. Will the trash be hauled out to the curb, or will the trash collectors be picking that up? What's the CONOPS here of this?
So the trash room is located very close to the curb. I think what has to be worked out with them directly is whether they would come in and bring the bins out or whether they would require. I believe that in our correspondence with them, they will come and bring it out because we've got it really close to the sidewalk. It's within the distance that they will service.
Okay, that would be good. I'm worried about the bike lane out there being cluttered with big trash bins. This is the middle of a parking lot, and I'm worried about the heat island effect. We're cutting down some trees and we're building almost to the property line, and that's a good thing from a housing standpoint, but a really bad thing from a heat island standpoint. And I don't like the bulb outs because of the bike lane. So now we're talking about perhaps not having any trees on the site. Something like a green wall would be better than nothing. I'm not wild about shrinking the units to add trees, but I'm also not wild about not having trees. And so this is a dilemma here. What's the best route? But that bothers me, both the fact that we are getting rid of trees and not replacing them. The in lieu for like downtown developments, is that standard? Like we have the 30% landscaping requirement. That's, I think, on slide 4. Downtown, does anyone do that? Get 30% of the area being ground landscaped?
So that standard is specific to the community commercial zone. It is likely that downtown, which are the CD-C zones, would have a different standard.
Okay, I have not looked at. Okay, yeah, that's all for now.
Okay, before I start with my comments, I did have a quick kind of follow-up because Commissioner Aiken asked the question in the clarifying question section about how pricing would be determined for the BMR units. And I know that staff can't give us specifics, but then Commissioner Liu referenced that, the 50 to 80% unit would be affordable for 2 teachers. So I was wondering if staff could provide a little bit more information about how for sale BMR works, specifically answering the question that Commissioner Aiken raised, which is if something is covering a range, if it's 50 to 80% or 80 to 120%, we know that for rents, there's a maximum rent set on that unit that effectively means that 80 to 120% is really using the 120% AMI number. So I wanted to understand for sale units, is that the same or is it different? We haven't seen much for sale BMR in the recent past here at the P2C.
Yeah. So the requirement for our planned home zoning is 80% AMI. And I know, and so I don't know if Mr. Yang, if you have that answer. I know this is something that has come up recently, and I think it may be at that top at 80%, but there's also some scenarios where we work with the where we require it to be like at 70% so that there's room. But Mr. Yang, I see you're on camera.
Yeah, I would want to confirm this with our housing planner, but my understanding is for income eligibility, the income of the household can go up to that 80%, but that we require the rent to be calculated based on 70%.
Okay, so what does that mean for sale then? Is it a mortgage payment or, because the dimension becomes much more complex at that point. Mortgages depend on amount down and all of that, right?
Yeah, so So it is more complex and it is about the total monthly payment. And so that's going to depend on interest rates and if there are any HOA fees. All of that gets taken into account, and the total payment every month needs to come within whatever the amount is for affordability.
Okay, so then the total amount for affordability, whether it is a rental or whether it is a for sale unit, would be the same. It's that same formula that's used. Is that correct?
Right. It's just there are a lot more inputs on the for sale side.
Understood. Thank you. That's good. And I really hope that when this comes back to us, if it comes back to us, that we have some really solid numbers on this. And I know that it depends on interest rates, but we can do a hypothetical interest rate. Like if the interest rate were X percent, 5% or 10%, then this is what it would mean. Because I think we need to educate ourselves as well as the public on what this really means in terms of affordability. It's an important issue that City Council has been looking at when we look at our own affordable housing policies and the waivers that we give there. And it's also important as we look at trying to really understand how we're going to meet these RHNA requirements for 80%. Okay, now on to this project specifically and my thoughts on it. So when I first looked at this, I concurred with Mr. Galbraith, which is like, this is a fantastic location for housing, right? You could walk out your door, go to Trader Joe's. Like, how many other places in the city could you actually do this? And that is phenomenal. It's also right next to the transit center. The schools may be a bit of a problem. I agree with Commissioner Templeton there. There's little impact on existing residents, which is fantastic. I mean, truly fantastic, because our city is so built out. It's really close to some great bike lanes. There's a big bike lane right behind Town and Country. Stanford has a ton of bike lanes. El Camino is going to have bike lanes. So this is all great. It's also not office. So that's absolutely fantastic. On the other hand, when I look at this, I will note, though, that despite, this is me on my soapbox, despite this fantastic proximity to services, there's a lot of parking that the developer is proposing here, which indicates to me, and we've heard this actually from a number of landlords and people in the real estate business, like parking is needed in this area. We wish that it weren't, but even in a transit-rich environment, parking is needed. So now, on the other side, I just feel like this is potentially trying to do too much given this really tiny parcel. And we heard from Mr. Galbraith when Vice Chair Reckdahl asked, have you considered looking higher? And I too am very appreciative of the applicant for the amount of revisions that they have made and their efforts to work with Town and Country and bringing down the height. But you can see that even if they wanted to go higher, there's actually significant problems there. So this all says to me, and we have to, there's not enough green space, there's no setbacks. So this just says to me that we might be asking too much for such a small site. There's the tree replanting issue, the green space issue. It is true that eventually there may be many other residents in this area, but right now there's not going to be a lot. And if we're saying that their recreational space is the little parking lot essentially between their garages behind the fence, that just sounds really unpalatable. So I think that maybe, I also hate to reduce the size of the units or reduce the number of units, but this is a tiny little postage stamp piece of land, and it seems evident that we can't go tons of stories high here, not just because of the neighbors' objections, but because of fire safety. So maybe it's too much. I do wish that the applicant had been able to address some of the aesthetic concerns raised by the ARB and in the kind of ARB pre-screening, pre-hearing, whatever you call it. And I certainly hope that those things are addressed because then we wouldn't have to all be talking about it today. So I hope that if we hear it again, that things like materials will be addressed. And then for me also, the bulb outs and using the public right of way for a private development is just a non-starter. What we have going on here is the gate put up at a certain location in order to allow the residents to access their private parking. The effect of that gate and the bulb outs as a solution is the removal of public parking. So we're literally in this case taking like public parking spaces and transferring them to a private ownership, and that seems wrong. And so we've got to figure out something there. And if we can't put the trees there, then I think that we've got to shrink the footprint of the building and bring it back in somehow. I do really wish that there were a more comprehensive plan for this area. I don't know if this is what a specific plan would do, because if that whole parking lot were turned into a housing development with adequate parking built somewhere else, I mean, we could have some really phenomenal housing there. So those are my thoughts. I think there's a lot of work to be done. I would like to hear from my colleagues about what we think is the best way to continue with this, because our options are to move it onto the ARB, giving all the very strong feedback that we have given, or we could keep it here and see if some of these things could be addressed now. So I'm going to tee it up for Commissioner Templeton.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for the comments so far. I feel validated that we do need to understand the future context of this street in order to be comfortable with developing this parcel first. And that doesn't mean that we don't like the project. I mean, you're hearing a lot of positive things about the project, but you're also hearing some concerns about how it fits and how it will be developed in the future, which is not necessarily your problem, but it's definitely a city question that we need to have a little bit more insight on. So yes, I also would like to see how we plan to develop the space. And I don't know if that means it would include all of Town and Country or just Encina. It's a question for council. So regarding whether we move it on to ARB, the comments of my colleagues has convinced me we should go ahead and do that and see if we can make some progress through their expertise before getting back to us. I think the only thing I haven't commented on is bulb outs, but I would just be repeating, yes, we don't need those, and they would be a bike hazard. Thank you.
I see no lights, so we may be ready for a motion, because I've heard a bunch of my colleagues up here suggest that it's time to move it onto the ARB, but if it looks the way it does right now, we won't be approving it. One more from Vice Chair Rectal.
Yeah, I looked up CN, and CN actually has higher. It is 35% ground level landscaping requirement. It was supposed to 30. So what would be useful is, granted this is a PHC, so they don't have to follow anything, but it would be nice to know what kind of precedent when we have, particularly if you look down the road, this probably will be something equivalent to a downtown area from a density standpoint. So what's our standard protocol downtown? How do we deal with ground floor landscaping downtown? And that would be good information to have.
Just to reiterate, the CN is neighborhood commercial and not the downtown zone.
CC is, yeah. One of them is 20 and the other is 30. So, by the way, big picture, it'd be nice to know we have this requirement for 30% ground floor landscaping. What do we do other areas of the city? And do we routinely waive this, or is this something that is enforced elsewhere?
All right. Yeah, no more lights. So would somebody like to make a motion?
I can make a motion. I think with all of our reservations, I still think the motion would be to send this to the ARB so they can work on improving the project.
Second. Further discussion from the commission? No lights. Okay, so Ms. Dow, could you take the vote, please?
Commissioner Templeton,
Yes.
Commissioner Heckman,
Yes.
Vice Chair Rekdal,
Yes.
Chair Chang,
Yes.
Commissioner Aiken,
Yes.
Commissioner Suma,
Yes.
Commissioner Liu,
Yes.
motion carries 7-0.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So our next agenda item tonight is the approval of minutes. So we've got 3 sets of minutes from April 10th, April 24th, and then on June 12th, we have the draft verbatim and summary minutes. Would anybody like to make motion? And maybe we can even roll them all into one.
Yeah, unless Mr. Yang tells us otherwise, I think tonight we can, whereas we had an issue with that last time. So I'll make a motion and Mr. Yang can cut me off if I'm doing something that we can't do. I will move approval of the, well, actually, before I do that, this doesn't work if anybody missed any of the meetings, because they would have to abstain as to that.
We have to take them one by one. Somebody thinks they have to abstain. So let's do them one at a time.
Okay. All right. So I move approval of the PTC draft verbatim minutes of April 10th, 2024 as revised.
I second. Discussion? Ms. Dow, please call the vote.
I think we can also do voice vote since we're
Okay,
all.
yes, let's do that. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Any abstentions? None. All right, so the motion passes unanimously, 7-0.
I move approval of the PTC draft verbatim minutes of April 24th, 2024 as revised.
Second.
Discussion? All right, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, that passes unanimously, 7-0.
Move approval of the PTC draft verbatim and summary minutes of June 12th, 2024 as revised.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Oh, we could have done them all together. All right, that passed unanimously, 7-0. All right, our final item of tonight is commissioner questions, comments, announcements, or future meetings and agendas. Commissioner Templeton?
Yes, I was wondering if I could swap October on-call duty with someone else. Is there anybody who would like to be the city council on-call representative in October? If not, I can work it out with my backup, but I know that she's going to miss
The
some
backup
dates
is
as
going to
well.
be out of town for one of those also,
Yeah.
so.
So I think we may need to think about coverage.
So I have September, and so far it doesn't look like there's anything to do in September. I'm around in October, so I would swap with you and you may have very light duty in September if that works for you.
What an angel. That sounds like a plan. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Heckman. As you know, many of the people up here are running for office, and so October is going to be a little hectic, so thank you.
And I'll just note that this wasn't in the report, but October 21st is when we're going to have the PTC work plan actually presented to the city council. So
I'm on duty for that
I
one.
think you will, yes, the chair, I think at a minimum will also be there.
I'm concerned that I'm not here.
Or vice chair. Or Commissioner Heckman.
Just a couple more. First, I wanted to welcome our new Assistant Director of Planning. We're all excited to work with you. Absolutely. And then I just thought we should, close tonight in remembrance of those who lost their lives on 9/11.
Before we do that, I didn't know if staff had any, we had discussions in pre-meeting about potentially rejiggering some meetings, but I didn't know if we wanted to discuss that now or wait a little bit.
Thank you for that question. We will bring that to your next meeting.
Okay.
Then when we bring the full schedule forward.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, so maybe we just take a moment of silence. Okay, thank you, everyone. This meeting is adjourned.